Florence, 1513. The air in the Palazzo Pitti was thick with the scent of beeswax and the faint, metallic tang of blood from the butcher's stalls in the Oltrarno across the Arno. It was a scent that would cling to Catherine de Medici, a phantom perfume of her childhood, of a world where life was as fragile and fleeting as the frescoes adorning the walls. Her birth, a tempestuous affair in a year marked by the death of a Medici pope, had set a tone of precariousness. Her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, a woman of noble lineage, had succumbed to childbed fever mere weeks after Catherine's arrival, a pale ghost already fading from the vibrant tapestry of Renaissance Florence. Her father, Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, a man whose lineage pulsed with the raw ambition of banking and politics, followed soon after, struck down by illness that the physicians, with their poultices and prayers, could not conquer. Orphaned before she could truly grasp the contours of her parents' faces, Catherine was a pawn in a grander game, a jewel to be polished and presented. She was a child of privilege, yes, but a privilege steeped in loss. The vast halls of the Medici palace echoed with the footsteps of servants and the hushed conversations of guardians, but rarely with the warmth of familial affection. Her education was rigorous, a relentless immersion in Latin, Greek, philosophy, and the arts that were the very lifeblood of her city. She learned to read the intricate weave of Florentine politics, the subtle shifts in allegiance, the silent language of power that was spoken in glances and veiled threats. The grandeur of the Duomo, the daring of Brunelleschi's dome, the burgeoning genius of Michelangelo, these were the sights and sounds of her formative years, but they were viewed through a lens of vulnerability. She was the last direct descendant of a powerful branch of the Medici family, a prize to be secured, a strategic alliance to be forged. The whispers that followed her, even in childhood, were not of her beauty or her wit, but of her inheritance, her bloodline, the weight of her name. She learned early to observe, to listen, to cultivate a stillness that belied the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. Resilience was not a choice, it was a necessity, a shield forged in the crucible of early widowhood and political maneuvering. She was a Florentine by birth, but the world was already shaping her into something more, something that would transcend the borders of her native city, something that would carry the scent of intrigue and ambition wherever she went. The shadows of loss were long, but within them, a keen intellect and an indomitable will began to take root, nurtured by the very complexities of power that had orphaned her. 1533. The air in the French royal court was a heady perfume of rosewater, expensive silks, and the underlying musk of human ambition. Catherine, barely 14, felt like a small bird swept into a gilded cage, its bars fashioned from protocol and expectation. The marriage to Henry, Duke of Orléans, the second son of King Francis I, was a grand, politically advantageous union, a pact sealed not with love, but with the weighty aspirations of two powerful houses. She stood before him, a slender figure in a gown heavy with embroidery, her dark Italian eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He was handsome, a prince of France, with the swagger of a warrior and the charm of a man accustomed to adoration. But even then, a shadow flickered at the edges of his attention, the first hint of the infatuations that would define his reign and complicate Catherine's own. The French court was a dazzling, bewildering spectacle. The Loire Valley, with its magnificent chateau, was a far cry from the bustling piazzas of Florence. Here, ceremony reigned supreme. Every gesture, every word, was weighed and measured. Catherine, a foreigner with a slightly accented French and a dowry that was, some whispered, less substantial than initially promised, found herself navigating a labyrinth of ancient customs and entrenched rivalries. Her education had prepared her for the intellectual rigors of court, but not for the subtle, often cruel, social warfare. She was expected to be a vessel for the continuation of the royal line, a wife whose primary duty was to produce heirs. The hopes of her family, the hopes of France, rested on her slender shoulders. She learned to smile when she felt like weeping, to be gracious when she felt ignored, to observe the intricate dance of power from the periphery. She saw the king, Francis I, a man of charisma and appetite, and she saw the women who vied for his favor, their whispers and smiles a constant undercurrent of intrigue. Henry, her husband, was a more distant figure, often caught in the orbit of his father or his own burgeoning affections. Catherine was a young bride, a political tool, and a woman beginning to understand the immense gulf between her personal desires and the demands of her royal destiny. The apprehension she felt was not just the nervousness of a young girl, but the dawning awareness of the immense sacrifices required of a queen, and the precariousness of her position in a court that valued beauty and lineage above all else. Yet, within that apprehension, a nascent understanding of her role began to form, a role that would demand far more than mere royal companionship. 1547. The air in the Louvre was charged with a new energy, a palpable shift in the currents of power. Henry II, her husband, now King of France, had ascended the throne, and Catherine's position as queen consort, once a title of promise, now held the weight of established authority. Yet, it was a precarious authority, perpetually overshadowed. The gilded cage of the French court, once merely intimidating, now felt suffocating. And within it, a formidable presence loomed, Diane de Poitiers. The king's mistress, a woman of formidable beauty and unwavering influence, held court in Henry's affections and, by extension, in the affairs of state. She was older, wiser in the ways of power, and utterly captivating to the king. Catherine, now in her mid-30s, had borne Henry 10 children, securing the Valois line, a feat that should have cemented her status. Instead, she found herself relegated to the shadows, her maternal achievements eclipsed by Diane's passionate embrace of the king. The court was a stage, and Catherine, despite her crown, felt like a supporting actress in her own life. Diane, with her regal bearing and her shrewd manipulation of the king's desires, was the undisputed star. She dictated fashion, influenced appointments, and wielded a power that often bypassed the queen entirely. Catherine watched, a silent observer, her frustration a smoldering ember beneath a carefully constructed facade of royal decorum. She was queen, but her will was rarely her own. The ceremonies, the banquets, the elaborate courtly rituals, they were all performed under Diane's watchful eye, a constant reminder of her own diminished influence. Ambition, once a quiet hum, now throbbed with a desperate urgency. She yearned for a voice, for agency, for a position that reflected her true status. But the king's infatuation with Diane was a seemingly insurmountable barrier, a wall built of passion and habit that Catherine could not breach. Her awareness of her limitations grew with each passing year, a bitter draught she was forced to swallow daily. She was the mother of the Dauphin, the future of France, yet her own influence was curtailed by the king's dalliances. The frustration was a constant companion, a gnawing dissatisfaction that fueled a quiet, simmering resentment. She was a queen in name, but not yet in power, a position that felt both humiliating and dangerously untenable. 1555. The scent of lavender and beeswax, familiar comforts in the sprawling royal residences, mingled with the faint, earthy smell of the nurseries. Catherine, now 46, felt a profound sense of quiet satisfaction. The birth of her 10th and final child, a daughter, Alex, was not a public spectacle of grand pronouncements, but a deeply personal triumph. It was a quiet affirmation, a final, irrefutable testament to her role as the mother of the Valois line. The court, ever a stage for drama and intrigue, buzzed with its usual currents of gossip and ambition, but for Catherine, this moment was a pause, a brief respite in the relentless march of political life. The whispers of her fertility, once a source of anxiety and speculation, had now solidified into a bulwark of her position. 10 children, a dynasty secured. This was a maternal strength, a quiet victory won in the intimate theater of her chambers, far from the glittering ballrooms and the watchful eyes of courtiers. While the king's attention remained largely fixed on Diane de Poitiers, and the political machinations of the Guise family grew ever more pronounced, Catherine had achieved something elemental, something undeniable. She had fulfilled her primary duty, not just once, but 10 times over. There was a maternal pride in this, a deep-seated joy in the healthy cries of her newborn daughter, a tangible connection to the future she had helped to secure. It was a strategic advantage, subtle but significant. Her sons, her heirs, were now firmly established, their futures seemingly assured. Amidst the public spectacle of court life, this was a private moment of profound satisfaction, a quiet consolidation of her influence, a subtle shift in the balance of power, however imperceptible to the superficial gaze of the court. She had played her hand, and this was a winning card, dealt from the depths of her maternal strength. 1559. The air in the royal hunting grounds was thick with the coppery scent of blood, a smell that would forever be seared into Catherine's memory. It was the scent of sudden, brutal chaos, the shattering of a fragile peace. The jousting tournament, a spectacle of chivalric display, had turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. The king, Henry II, a man of powerful physique and reckless courage, had been fatally wounded, a splintered lance piercing his eye. The vibrant colors of the silks and banners seemed to mock the stark reality of death. Screams, sharp and piercing, tore through the celebratory atmosphere. Catherine stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis. Shock, profound and paralyzing, washed over her, followed by a grief that was a physical blow. The man who had been her husband for 26 years, the father of her children, the source of so much of her frustration and her quiet ambition, was dying before her eyes. The vibrant, often distant, figure of Henry was now reduced to a broken, bleeding man. The fragile piece of her existence, the carefully constructed order of her life, had been irrevocably shattered. As the king's labored breaths grew shallower, a chilling realization dawned. The weight of the crown, once a distant prospect, now pressed down upon her with an unbearable force. Her eldest son, Francis, a sickly boy of 15, was the rightful heir. But he was young, impressionable, and easily swayed. The Guise family, with their insatiable hunger for power, would see this as their opportunity. Diane de Poitiers, the king's mistress, her longtime rival, was suddenly vulnerable, her influence evaporating with Henry's dying breaths. In the midst of the pandemonium, the cries of her children, the frantic ministrations of the physicians, Catherine felt a primal instinct surge within her. She was no longer merely queen consort, the mother of the heir. She was now, or would soon be, the queen mother, the regent, the protector of her dynasty. The immense responsibility settled upon her like a shroud. The future of France, teetering on the precipice of religious division and political instability, now rested squarely on her shoulders. The games of courtly love and petty rivalries were over. A far more dangerous, far more consequential game had just begun. The shock would fade, the grief would recede, but the dawning realization of her immense responsibility would remain, a constant, heavy presence. The plea, unspoken but fervent, rose from the depths of her soul: watch, observe, understand, survive. And to those who would follow this unfolding drama, this descent into the heart of power and its most brutal consequences, there was only one thing to do: subscribe, and witness the storm that was about to break. The air in the Louvre, once thick with the scent of roses and wood smoke, now carried the metallic tang of fear. Catherine, no longer merely the queen consort, but the queen mother, felt its chill seep into the very stone of the palace. The crown, a heavy circlet of gold and jewels, pressed not just upon her brow, but upon her very soul. Her eldest son, Francis, a pale boy king, was a fragile vessel for the ambitions of a nation fracturing along the fault lines of faith. And around him, like circling vultures, the Guise family: Francis, the Duke, a man carved from granite and zeal, and Charles, the Cardinal, his eyes holding the calculating glint of a predator, tightened their grip. They whispered of divine right, of purging the heretics, their voices a low hum of menace beneath the gilded ceilings. Catherine watched, her own hands now stained by the dust of power, her mind a labyrinth of strategies and counter-strategies. The weight of France, a kingdom teetering on the precipice of religious schism, rested squarely on her shoulders. Her heart, a battlefield of maternal love and steely resolve, beat with a fierce, protective rhythm. She was determined to steer this storm, to be the rock upon which her son's fragile reigns would stand, or to be consumed by the tempest herself. This was not the Florence of her youth, nor the gilded cage of her early years as queen. This was the crucible of command, and she would forge herself anew within its flames. The simmering discontent of the Huguenots, the French Protestants, had finally boiled over. The conspiracy of Amboise, a desperate, ill-conceived plot to seize the young king and curb the Guise' influence, had been ruthlessly crushed. The air now reeked of blood and terror. Catherine, her face a mask of regal composure, had sanctioned the swift, brutal retribution. The heads of the executed conspirators, a gruesome procession of defiance, were displayed on the city walls, a stark warning to any who dared to challenge the established order. The atmosphere in the court was one of brittle silence, punctuated by the rustle of silk and the sharp intake of breath. Every shadow seemed to harbor a spy, every whispered conversation a potential betrayal. Catherine moved through this poisoned atmosphere with a grim pragmatism, her mind honed by years of observation and survival. The pressure to maintain order, to project an image of unwavering strength, was immense. Yet, beneath the veneer of authority, a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She understood the desperate hunger for power that drove men, the religious fervor that could blind them to reason. She had seen it in her own family, in the eyes of her husband, Henry. Now, she saw it amplified in the relentless ambition of the Guise. Her reign, or rather the reigns of her sons, would be a constant battle for control, a dance on the edge of an abyss. The suppression of the Amboise plot was a victory, yes, but a victory steeped in the bitter taste of atrocity. It was a necessary evil, she told herself, a grim pragmatism born of necessity, but the stain of it would linger, a dark shadow on her conscience. The fragile reign of Francis II, a sickly boy king, withered and died as abruptly as it had begun. The jousting tournament that had claimed his father had also claimed him, a lung ailment, perhaps exacerbated by the pressures of his youth and the weight of the crown, finally extinguished his life. Catherine, her face etched with a grief that was both profound and politically astute, found herself once again at the heart of a succession crisis. Her second son, the young Charles, now barely 13, was to be king. The court buzzed with a renewed intensity, alliances shifted like sand dunes in a gale, and the ever-present threat of external interference, from Spain or England, loomed large. The Guise family, though temporarily chastened by the young king's death, remained a potent force, their influence a constant shadow. Catherine, a seasoned player in the intricate Game of Thrones, began her calculated maneuvering. She had to secure her son's position, to solidify her own authority as regent, to navigate the treacherous currents of courtly intrigue. Anxiety was a constant companion, a gnawing beneath the surface of her outward calm, but it was tempered by a steely resolve. She would control the narrative, shape the perception of power, and ensure that her sons, and by extension her own legacy, would endure. The death of one king was merely the prelude to the ascension of another, and Catherine, the ever-present puppeteer, was already pulling the strings. The fragile peace was shattered. The wars of religion, a smoldering conflict that had been a constant undercurrent of unrest, erupted into open, brutal warfare. The Massacre of Vassy, a horrific act of violence perpetrated by the Duke of Guise's men against a congregation of Huguenots attending a sermon, ignited the powder keg. The streets of France ran red with sectarian hatred. Catherine watched in despair as her kingdom tore itself apart, the religious schism deepening into an unbridgeable chasm. Her resolve hardened, a grim determination to protect her dynasty, to preserve the integrity of France, even if it meant making impossible choices. The moral compromises of survival were no longer abstract concepts. They were the harsh realities of her daily existence. She felt a profound weariness settle upon her, a deep-seated fatigue from the constant struggle, but it was a weariness that fueled her defiance. She would not yield. She would not let France descend into utter chaos. She would find a way to restore order, to broker peace, even if it meant walking a path paved with the bones of her own people. The violence was a visceral shock, a brutal reminder of the deep-seated animosities that festered beneath the surface of French society. Her heart ached for the suffering, but her mind was already calculating the next move, the next fragile alliance, the next desperate attempt to stitch the torn fabric of her kingdom back together. Catherine's influence over her young son, Charles IX, was a delicate dance between maternal guidance and shrewd political manipulation. She guided his hand, whispered counsel in his ear, shaping his perceptions, nurturing his nascent authority. But the court was a viper's nest, and the threat of assassination plots, of rivals seeking to exploit the young king's inexperience, was ever present. The Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a temporary respite from the bloodshed, was a testament to her tireless efforts to broker peace, to maintain royal authority in the face of relentless opposition. Yet, even as she worked to consolidate power, to foster a sense of stability, she knew that the peace was precarious, a thin veneer over a cauldron of simmering resentments. She felt a deep-seated weariness, a constant drain on her spirit, but her strategic foresight remained sharp, her gaze fixed on the long game. She understood that true power lay not just in wielding the sword, but in the subtle art of persuasion, in the careful cultivation of loyalty, and in the unwavering determination to protect the Valois line. The constant threat of violence, the whispers of conspiracy, the knowledge that any misstep could plunge France back into chaos, weighed heavily upon her. Yet, she continued, her resolve unyielding, her eyes fixed on the prize, a stable, unified France, ruled by her sons, under her watchful gaze. She was the architect of their reigns, the silent force behind the throne, her life a testament to the enduring power of a mother's will. The battlefield's grim aftermath was a tableau of mud, blood, and shattered banners. Among the fallen, the body of Louis, Prince of Condé, a pivotal leader of the Huguenot cause, lay still. His death, occurring under circumstances shrouded in suspicion, sent a fresh wave of unease through the already fractured kingdom. Whispers, insidious and persistent, began to circulate through the war-weary camps and the opulent halls of the Louvre alike. Poison, the silent assassin, was spoken of in hushed tones, a dark art attributed to the Queen Mother. Catherine, her face a mask of carefully cultivated grief and serene authority, denied any involvement, yet the legend of her sorcery, her penchant for subtle, deadly remedies, grew with each passing rumor. The suspicion, a venomous seed, took root in the fertile ground of fear and religious animosity. She felt the weight of these veiled accusations, the growing reputation that clung to her like the scent of expensive perfume, both alluring and dangerous. It was a dangerous game, this dance with death, and the shadows of her alleged deeds stretched long, even as she worked to forge a fragile peace. A fragile truce settled over France, the Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a welcome, if temporary, respite from the ravages of war. The air in the royal court, though still thick with the scent of intrigue, felt lighter, tinged with a cautious optimism. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the deep wounds of religious conflict might begin to heal. Catherine, ever the strategist, seized this moment of relative calm to consolidate her power, to mend fences, and to prepare for the inevitable resurgence of conflict. She renewed her focus on the intricate machinations of court politics, her mind a whetstone honed by decades of survival. Yet, beneath the surface of this fleeting peace, the underlying tensions remained palpable, a coiled serpent waiting to strike. She felt a fleeting sense of relief, a deep breath drawn after a long period of suffocation, but it was a relief tinged with an ever-present apprehension. The peace was a delicate flower, easily crushed, and she knew that her vigilance could never waver. The marriage of her daughter, Margaret of Valois, to Henry of Navarre, a prominent Huguenot leader, was a spectacle of dazzling opulence, a grand design intended to weave a tapestry of unity from the torn threads of a fractured nation. Banners fluttered, trumpets blared, and the scent of expensive perfumes mingled with the earthy aroma of the city's teeming streets. It was a calculated gamble for peace, a bold stroke of diplomacy orchestrated by Catherine herself, a testament to her unwavering commitment to the survival of her dynasty and the preservation of France. She watched the proceedings with a mixture of hope and a gnawing foreboding. The pressure of orchestrating such a pivotal event, of holding the fragile peace in her hands, was immense. Every smile, every handshake, every carefully worded sentiment was a thread in a complex web, and she prayed it would hold. The eve of the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre. The air in Paris was thick with a palpable tension, a feverish anticipation that crackled like static electricity. The city, adorned for the royal wedding, now felt like a tinderbox awaiting a spark. Whispers, once confined to darkened corridors, now seemed to spill out into the torchlit streets, carrying with them the chilling prelude to unimaginable violence. Hidden agendas, long-suppressed resentments, and the ever-present religious animosity coalesced into a palpable sense of dread. Catherine, her face a mask of strained composure, moved through the opulent halls of the Louvre, her mind a whirlwind of desperate decisions, of escalating paranoia. The grand celebration had devolved into a chilling stillness, a pregnant pause before the storm. The weight of the impending events pressed down on her, a suffocating shroud. August 24, 1572. The city awoke not to the gentle dawn, but to the terrifying clang of church bells, a discordant symphony of alarm. The unleashed fury, the widespread bloodshed, the horrific culmination of years of religious animosity, had begun. The streets of Paris, moments before filled with the joyous sounds of a royal wedding, now echoed with the screams of the innocent. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre had begun, a brutal wave of violence that would engulf the city and, in its wake, leave an indelible stain on the soul of France. Catherine, witnessing the unfolding horror, felt a profound sense of disbelief, a chilling realization of the abyss into which her kingdom had plunged. The delicate threads of peace, so painstakingly woven, had been brutally torn asunder, leaving behind a landscape of carnage and despair. The grim task of managing the fallout from the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre consumed Catherine. The city, once a vibrant heart of culture and power, was now a charnel house, its streets stained with the blood of thousands. International condemnation rained down upon France, a torrent of outrage from Protestant nations, while Catholic powers offered their tacit approval or a deafening silence. Catherine, her face etched with a weariness that belied her outward strength, found herself in a relentless cycle of damage control, defending her actions, or at least the actions of the crown, to a hostile world. She navigated the treacherous currents of diplomacy, her words carefully chosen, her explanations meticulously crafted, yet she knew that the stain of that night would forever mark her reign, and indeed her very soul. She felt a profound sense of defensiveness, a desperate need to justify the unfathomable, but also a growing awareness of the heavy burden of historical judgment that now rested upon her shoulders. The massacre was a cataclysm, and she, the Queen Mother, was forever bound to its horrific legacy. The Siege of La Rochelle, a brutal testament to the Huguenots' enduring resilience, became a defining moment in the ongoing conflict. The city, a bastion of Protestant resistance, held firm against the royal forces, its walls a symbol of defiance. Catherine, her energies flagging but her resolve unyielding, continued her persistent efforts to find a lasting peace, to broker an end to the seemingly endless cycle of violence. The Edict of Boulogne, a fragile document promising a degree of religious tolerance, offered a glimmer of hope, a weary sigh of temporary cessation. Yet, the deep scars of war remained, and the path to true reconciliation was fraught with peril. Catherine felt a profound fatigue, a deep-seated weariness of the constant negotiation, the endless struggle to impose order on chaos. The desire for peace warred with the grim realities of power, and she knew that her work was far from over. The death of Charles IX, her second son, cast a long shadow over the already turbulent landscape of France. The crown, with its heavy burden of responsibility, passed to her third son, Henry III, a complex and often controversial figure. Catherine, though aging, remained a formidable force, her influence as Queen Mother undiminished, her political acumen as sharp as ever. She continued to engage in the intricate machinations of court politics, observing, advising, and subtly guiding her son's reign. There was a sense of continuity, a familiar rhythm to the political dance, even as the players and the stakes evolved. Her engagement with power was an enduring nature, a testament to her lifelong dedication to the Valois dynasty and the stability of France. The assassination of Henry III, a violent end to the Valois dynasty, plunged France into a profound succession crisis. The ensuing power vacuum ignited a fresh wave of civil war, the kingdom once again tearing itself apart. Catherine, though spared the immediate violence of the act, felt a profound sorrow, a deep sense of loss for her son and for the dynasty she had so fiercely protected. There was a sense of finality, a bittersweet observation of history's relentless march, as the era of the Valois drew to a close. Her life's work, the preservation of her family's power, had reached its ultimate, tragic conclusion. Catherine de Medici's death in 1589 marked the end of an era, but her legacy, a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and brutality, endured. Her life, defined by an extraordinary intersection of power, patronage of the arts, and the dark whispers of poison, had left an indelible mark on France. She was a figure of immense influence, a woman who had navigated the treacherous currents of 16th-century European politics with a shrewdness and determination that few could match. Her patronage of the arts had fostered a golden age of culture, while her political maneuvering had shaped the destiny of a nation. Yet, it was the lingering mystery of her alleged involvement in the deaths of her rivals, the enduring legend of her poisoned chalices and subtle concoctions, that continued to fuel fascination and condemnation. As the dust settled on her extraordinary life, Catherine de Medici remained an enigma, a woman whose true intentions and the extent of her culpability in the dark deeds of her time would forever be debated, a testament to the enduring power of her controversial and captivating story. The air in the royal chambers, once thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax, now carried a subtle, acrid undercurrent, a whisper of suspicion that clung to the tapestries like damp rot. It was the year of our Lord 1568, and a chill had settled over the French court, one that had little to do with the waning autumn sun. Louis, Prince of Condé, a name that had thundered across battlefields and echoed in Huguenot prayers, lay dead. His demise, like so many others who dared to stand against the established order, was shrouded in a miasma of conjecture. The battlefield, a churning cauldron of mud and blood, had yielded its grim harvest, but it was the hushed conversations in the gilded salons, the furtive glances exchanged over jeweled goblets, that truly painted the picture. Whispers, like vipers, slithered through the stone corridors, speaking not of honorable combat but of subtle brews, of slow-acting poisons slipped into wine, of a queen's unwavering resolve to remove obstacles with an unseen hand. Catherine, her face a mask of serene, almost detached, composure, moved through these shadowed spaces. Her eyes, dark and discerning, missed nothing, yet revealed even less. She was the architect of this fragile peace, the steady hand guiding a kingdom fractured by faith, and sometimes, the whisper suggested, she was also the one who cleared the path with a venomous touch. The legend of her dark arts, once a mere rumor, was solidifying, becoming an almost tangible presence, a phantom in the opulent chambers, a specter that haunted the dreams of her enemies. Then came 1570, and a breath of something akin to hope, or at least a temporary cessation of hostilities. The Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye was proclaimed, a fragile truce painstakingly negotiated, a delicate thread spun from diplomacy and exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, the clamor of war receded, replaced by the murmur of cautious optimism. The court, weary of bloodshed, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Yet, beneath the veneer of reconciliation, the undercurrents of tension remained palpable. The ink on the treaty was barely dry, and already old grievances festered, new alliances were being subtly forged, and the ever-present threat of renewed conflict loomed like a gathering storm. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, understood that this was not an end, but merely a pause. Her focus shifted, not to celebration, but to consolidation. The peace, however tenuous, offered an opportunity to reinforce her position, to strengthen the monarchy, and to ensure that the Valois line, so precariously balanced, would endure. She moved with a renewed sense of purpose, her gaze fixed on the long game, her mind already anticipating the next inevitable clash. The respite was welcome, but the true battle, the one for the soul of France, was far from over. The year 1572 dawned with a spectacle designed to bind the nation, a grand, ostentatious display of unity. Margaret of Valois, Catherine's own daughter, a princess of exquisite beauty and royal blood, was to wed Henry of Navarre, a prominent Huguenot leader. It was a calculated gamble, a union forged in the crucible of political necessity, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm of religious animosity that had cleaved France in two for a decade. The streets of Paris buzzed with anticipation, the air perfumed with the scent of orange blossoms and the heady aroma of spices brought from distant lands. Banners fluttered from every rooftop, and the city, for once, seemed united in its festive fervor. Catherine, the orchestrator of this momentous occasion, moved through the throngs with a practiced grace, her presence a calming force amidst the jubilant chaos. Yet, beneath the surface of this elaborate charade, a knot of foreboding tightened in her stomach. She saw the forced smiles, the wary glances exchanged between Catholic and Protestant nobles, the simmering resentments that the lavish ceremony could not entirely mask. It was a pivotal event, a gamble that could secure a lasting peace or ignite a conflagration. The pressure of orchestrating such a delicate balance, of holding together disparate factions with sheer force of will and political maneuvering, weighed heavily upon her. Hope was present, a fragile butterfly fluttering on the edge of her consciousness, but it was inextricably intertwined with a deep-seated apprehension, a chilling premonition of the storm that lay just beyond the horizon. Then came the night of August 23, 1572, the eve of the wedding that was meant to herald a new era of peace. The air in Paris grew heavy, not with the scent of celebration, but with a palpable tension, a suffocating stillness that preceded a tempest. The grand festivities had concluded, the last echoes of music had faded, and a different kind of activity began to stir in the darkened corners of the city. Whispers, no longer veiled, but sharp and urgent, coursed through the royal palace and the noble estates. Hidden agendas, long suppressed, began to surface, and the carefully constructed facade of unity began to crumble. In the hushed intimacy of her chambers, Catherine felt the chill of impending doom. The delicate dance of diplomacy had faltered, and the precarious peace had dissolved into a chilling prelude. The carefully laid plans, the intricate web of alliances and concessions, seemed to unravel with terrifying speed. Decisions, desperate and irreversible, were being made in the shadows, fueled by fear, by entrenched hatred, and by a chilling conviction that the time for negotiation had passed. The descent into a moral abyss was no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent reality. The city, once vibrant with celebration, now held its breath, awaiting the dawn, unaware of the horror it would usher in. The dawn of August 24, 1572, broke not with the gentle light of a new day, but with the brutal, crimson glare of unleashed fury. Bartholomew's Day massacre had begun. The carefully orchestrated peace, the grand wedding, the years of political maneuvering, all were swept away in a tidal wave of violence. The streets of Paris, moments before filled with the echoes of wedding festivities, now ran red with the blood of thousands. The simmering animosity, the deep-seated religious hatred that had festered for so long, erupted with a ferocity that shocked even those who had fueled its flames. The massacre was not confined to the city, it spread like a plague, engulfing towns and villages across France, a testament to the depth of the schism that had torn the nation apart. The cries of the innocent, the desperate pleas of those caught in the maelstrom, mingled with the triumphant roars of the mob and the chilling clang of steel. It was the horrific culmination of years of religious animosity, a bloody catharsis that plunged France into a new and even more brutal phase of its internal conflict. For Catherine, witnessing the unfolding horror, the initial shock gave way to a profound sense of disbelief, an agonizing realization that the very foundations of her kingdom were being ripped apart. The indelible stain of that day would forever mark her reign, and indeed, the history of France itself. The carefully constructed edifice of power she had so painstakingly built now seemed to crumble around her, buried beneath the weight of a nation tearing itself asunder. Catherine de Medici, the Queen Mother, moved through these spaces like a wraith, her silks rustling against the ancient stone floors, each step a measured cadence in a symphony of loss and survival. Bartholomew's Day massacre, that cataclysmic eruption of violence, had irrevocably altered the landscape of France, and with it, the carefully constructed edifice of her life. The immediate aftermath was a grim, unending task of damage control. Whispers, once confined to the shadowed corners of the court, now roared across Europe, painting her as the architect of a monstrous atrocity. Foreign powers, their own hands stained with the blood of religious conflict, clamored for explanations, for condemnations. Catherine, the pragmatist, the survivor, found herself ensconced in a defensive posture, her vast political intellect now tasked with parrying the accusations that threatened to engulf her in the Valois crown. She issued pronouncements, penned letters, met with ambassadors, her face a mask of regal composure, her mind a labyrinth of strategic calculations. She had to manage the fallout, to deflect blame, to steer the ship of state through a tempest of international condemnation. The weight of historical judgment, a burden far heavier than any jeweled crown, settled upon her shoulders. She was no longer merely a queen, she was a figure of infamy, her name forever entwined with the brutal sundering of her adopted land. The relentless cycle of conflict, however, refused to yield to mere pronouncements. While Catherine navigated the treacherous waters of diplomacy, the embers of war glowed fiercely in the west. La Rochelle, the defiant Huguenot stronghold, endured a brutal siege, its walls a testament to the unwavering faith and desperate courage of its defenders. The conflict raged, a relentless, draining affair that gnawed at the edges of the kingdom's already depleted resources. Yet, even amidst the din of cannons and the cries of the wounded, Catherine's inherent pragmatism asserted itself. Her focus, ever on the preservation of the monarchy and the integrity of France, led her back to the negotiation table. The Edict of Boulogne, a fragile agreement born of exhaustion and mutual attrition, offered a temporary respite, a concession to the enduring power of the Protestant minority. It was a testament to her persistent, almost weary, efforts to forge a lasting peace, a peace that always seemed to elude her grasp. The weariness was profound, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of courtly silks or perfumed air could disguise. She had witnessed too much, orchestrated too much, endured too much. The fragile peace, however, was a mere interlude. The year 1574 brought another seismic shift, the death of her second son, Charles IX. The sickly king, whose reign had been a constant tightrope walk between religious factions and his mother's guiding hand, finally succumbed. The crown passed to her third son, Henry III, a man of complex appetites and an increasingly uncertain grasp on power. Catherine, the Queen Mother, remained a formidable presence, her influence undimmed by the passage of years or the shifting sands of succession. Her political engagement, a lifelong habit, continued. She observed, she advised, she maneuvered, her keen eyes still scanning the horizon for threats and opportunities. The political machinations of the French court were an intricate dance, and she, even in her later years, remained a principal dancer, her movements precise, her intentions often veiled. The enduring nature of her political engagement was a testament to a spirit that refused to be extinguished, a mind that remained sharp even as her body began to falter. The Valois dynasty, the line she had so fiercely protected and guided, was destined for a violent and abrupt end. The year 1589 arrived not with the fanfare of a royal celebration, but with the chilling finality of an assassin's blade. Henry III, her son, met his end at the hands of a fanatical monk, plunging France into a renewed crisis of succession. The violent demise of the king created a gaping power vacuum, igniting a fresh wave of civil war. Catherine, who had spent her life weaving a tapestry of alliances and power, now witnessed its threads unraveling in a bloody cascade. The ensuing chaos, the desperate scramble for control, was a bitter culmination of decades of religious strife and political intrigue. Yet, even in the face of this profound sorrow, this sense of finality, there was a bittersweet observation of history's relentless unfolding. Her life's work, the preservation of her dynasty, had ultimately met a tragic end. She had played the game of power with unparalleled skill, but the forces she had sought to control had proven too vast, too volatile. Catherine de Medici finally succumbed to illness in 1589, her death marking the end of an era. Her legacy, however, was far from a simple epitaph. It was a complex, often contradictory, tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and brutality, of patronage and poison. She was the woman who had navigated the treacherous currents of the French Renaissance court, who had commissioned magnificent works of art and architecture, who had fostered the burgeoning scientific inquiries of her time, yet whose name was inextricably linked to the darkest chapters of French history. The whispers of her alleged poisoning of rivals, once confined to the hushed tones of courtiers and gossips, had solidified into a pervasive legend, a dark stain on her historical portrait. Had she indeed been the architect of such insidious plots? Or was she a victim of circumstance, a shrewd ruler forced to make impossible choices in a world consumed by religious fervor and political ambition? The truth, like the alchemy she was rumored to dabble in, remained elusive, a potent blend of fact and myth. Her impact on France was undeniable. She had shaped its destiny, steered its course through tempestuous seas, and left an indelible mark on its cultural and political landscape. Her life was a testament to the enduring power of a woman in a man's world, a study in the relentless pursuit of power, and a chilling reminder of the moral compromises that often accompany the exercise of authority. In the end, Catherine de Medici remained an enigma, a figure who commanded both admiration and revulsion, her story a perpetual source of fascination, a complex interplay of vindication and condemnation, and the enduring mystery of her true intentions continued to haunt the annals of history.